From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Thursday, March 13, 2025. Unjustified and a bad decision, but Australia won't be retaliating against Donald Trump's 25% tariffs on Australian steel and aluminium. The Albanese government is devastated at Trump's refusal to exempt Australia, as it did during his first administration. Now fears are rising this will poison other aspects of the US-Australian relationship. Anthony Albanese says he'll seek another phone call with the president to plead Australia's case. A huge NBN upgrade that cost $750 million was a giant flop, new figures show, with only an extra 100 customers signing up. The government-owned telco rolled out 5G-enabled wireless broadband, and it was supposed to lure customers from competitors like Elon Musk's Starlink. That's an exclusive by our tech editor, Jared Lynch. Live now at theaustralian.com.au. Police say a string of anti-Semitic attacks were part of a criminal hoax, not a reflection of anti-Jewish sentiment. But far from reassuring Jewish Australians, it's left a community with more questions than answers. Today, what's in it for criminals to spread fear among Jews? And how do we interpret those terrifying acts of violence now?
We are now confident that these tip-offs were fabricated and the Caravan plot was an elaborate scheme contrived by organised criminals domestically and from offshore.
On Monday, the Australian Federal Police and New South Wales Police offered their theory on why a caravan packed with explosives was left in a suburban Sydney street in January.
Today, I can reveal that the caravan was never going to cause a mass casualty event, but instead was concocted by criminals who wanted to cause fear for personal benefit.
Well, that's good, right? Alleged offenders are before the courts. Case closed. Except for Australia's Jewish community, it's very much not.
None of the individuals we have arrested during Pearl have displayed any form of anti-Semitic ideology.
This is Dave Hudson from New South Wales Police.
We don't believe there is any ongoing threat to the community from a terrorist act. However, outside of Pearl, we are continuing to see anti-Semitic incidents, and each of these will be fully investigated.
Chrissy Barrett from the Australian Federal Police.
Almost immediately, experienced investigators within the Joint Counter-Terrorism team believed that the caravan was part of a fabricated terrorist plot, essentially a criminal con job.
Stephen Rice is the Australian's New South Wales editor. Ricey, how has that announcement gone over in the Jewish community and beyond?
Well, it's gone down like a lead balloon, and so it should. I mean, it was a really surprising statement for, both the AFP and the New South Wales Police to come out with, effectively declaring that there was no anti-Semitism behind this, no actual anti-Semitism, and that it was all some kind of hoax. But the reality is that they haven't caught Mr. Big yet. They've charged, most recently, 14 people, none of them in relation to the caravan itself, surprisingly. And yet, despite the fact that they haven't got Mr. Big, they seem to be able to declare that there is no anti-Semitism as a motive behind this. And I'm not sure that I get that. And certainly the Jewish leaders that I've spoken to don't get it either. It has created, I think, in the wider community, a sentiment that it was all nothing really, that it was just a bunch of lowlifes who were paid to do this. And so it actually doesn't represent any kind of significant anti-Semitism in the community. And I think that's wrong. And I think the messaging from both the New South Wales Police and the Feds should have been a lot clearer on this.
Okay, so just step me through this like I'm a toddler. One of the things that police need is intelligence about what's going on in the criminal community. This is how they progress from learning about one crime to potentially uncovering a whole lot of other crimes or plots that are still underway. So let's say Mr. Big had committed some drug offences and is either in jail or is overseas trying to avoid being brought back to Australia to face charges. In the ordinary course of events, a high-level criminal knows things. So he's trying to sell that information essentially to the police, or in this case, trick the police. Is that right?
Yeah. The age-old example of this is the crim who says, I know where there's a bunch of rocket launchers, and if we can do a deal and you can talk to people and maybe I get 3 or 4 years off my sentence, I can tell you where these rocket launchers are. In that case, they've gone down this road before and the rocket launchers turn out to be 50 years old or more usually just non-existent. But there are cases where police and prosecuting authorities will maybe do deals, is perhaps putting it too strongly, but will take into account information that is given by criminals. What I fail to see in this case, yes, the Caravan, you can see that it's a nice package to deliver to the police. You've got a Caravan that's got explosives, it's dressed up with anti-Semitic literature, it's perfect. You know, you can virtually tie a bow around it and give it to the cops as a present. That's fine. But what about the 14 people who've most recently been charged? They are all just lowlifes who've been paid to go around burning some cars, scribbling racist graffiti on walls. What I don't understand is what advantage is that to Mr. Big? What leverage does he get out of having all these scumbags? I don't get it.
Yeah, especially if the alleged scumbags just lead you back to Mr. Big.
Exactly, yeah. It's like Mr. Big is going, here, you know, go and investigate all these people that I've hired to do this stuff. It doesn't make sense. There is so much about this case still that doesn't make sense. And the mixed messaging that's coming from both the New South Wales cops and the federal cops is not helping one bit. They cannot get their act together. They can't even agree on whether it's an overseas-based actor or a local.
It's important to note here, many of these individuals are making their way through the courts. Many of these claims are just allegations at this stage, and everyone has a right to a fair trial. Since October 7, 2023, when Hamas fighters slaughtered and raped civilians in Israel and took hundreds of hostages, the Jewish community around the world, including here in Australia, has been on high alert for a rise in anti-Semitic sentiment.
The river to the sea! Palestine will be free!
Here at The Australian, we've spent the past 17 months covering how anti-Israel and pro-Palestine groups have expressed themselves in marches, university encampments, and on social media. But in the past 6 months or so, the words seemed to become actions.
It's a problem that appears to be growing faster than the police operation trying to stop it.
We begin in Melbourne, where a synagogue has been destroyed in a targeted attack.
At about 4:10 this morning, offenders entered the property and set the synagogue ablaze.
Police are tonight asking for your help after a cafe in Bondi went up in flames early this morning.
Then, on On-Sea Lane at Kingsford, words too hateful to say sprayed across cars and garage doors.
In Sydney, families awoke to the word Jew scrawled on their homes or cars, and the smell of smoke. Many of those Sydney Jewish families are descendants of Holocaust survivors. For them, the fear of where anti-Semitism can go suddenly became very real. And when you understand that history, you know the word Jew being spray painted on a wall is not just a simple act of graffiti. That's exactly what was happening in Germany and Austria in the 1930s, when Adolf Hitler's rise was accompanied by terrifying attacks on Jewish homes and businesses. The revelation in February that a caravan packed with explosives and addresses of Jewish businesses had been discovered, it just sent those levels of fear into the stratosphere.
We believe the person pulling the strings wanted changes to their criminal status, but maintained a distance from their scheme and hired alleged local criminals to carry out parts of their plan. This twisted, self-serving criminality has terrorised Jewish Australians. There was also unwarranted suspicion directed at other communities, and that is also reprehensible.
I don't think we should forget that since that October 7 attack in 2023, the Hamas attack, there have been something like 700 anti-Semitic attacks in Australia, and the latest Strike Force Pearl, I think they've arrested 29 people. There is just no question there is a huge amount of actual anti-Semitic violence going on. And I'm not talking about pro-Palestinian marches or people being anti-Israel. I'm talking about actual anti-Semitic, Jew-hating stuff, that is increasingly degenerating into violence. And I'm even excluding, if you will, these latest paid attempts, and I'm saying exclude it, even though we don't know the motivation of the person directing it. Even if you exclude those, the extent of the violence against Jews in this country is quite extraordinary still.
After the break, so when is a racist attack not a racist attack? One of the things that I've been intrigued about from the beginning is why the word Jew being graffitied on walls has been such a constant throughout. If you know anything about history, you know that that was the precursor to the Holocaust, that the public shaming of Jews and the revelation of people's Jewish identity, the outing of Jews, that led in a direct line to the Holocaust. I'm not saying that there's another Holocaust in the offing, but that's why it was so chilling for Jews in Sydney. So if we think perhaps some or all of these anti-Semitic attacks were committed or inspired by other motives, just sort of pure criminality or some sort of self-serving motive, it seems awfully coincidental that the manifestation of that is this unbelievably terrifying graffiti of the word Jew.
Yeah, I just don't buy that these criminal acts, which clearly have anti-Semitism all over them, I don't buy that there was no anti-Semitic motivation behind it at all. And until we find the person behind it, until the police actually bring in this criminal mastermind that they're talking about, I don't think we can rule out what was going through his mind and why he decided to create all these incidents of pure anti-Jewish terror. For what reason? His own personal motives, or is there a motivation there? Is there Jew hatred behind these actions?
Yeah, if I threw a brick through the window of a black-owned business, for example, and the brick had the N-word scrawled on it, and my motivation for that was not actually creating racist terror, but was some other motive of my own, does it actually matter?
No. And if somebody paid you to throw that brick through that window, it's a racist attack.
One of the probably unintended consequences of the very emphatic way in which both New South Wales Police and the Federal Police have talked about this is that presumably it gives succour or ballast to those people who say they are not anti-Semitic, but they are anti-Israel, or that they reserve the right to be extremely critical of Israel. And that's something that we've heard from the pro-Palestinian groups from the beginning. We can criticise Israel. It's got nothing to do with the Jews. How does that play out, do you think?
Well, you saw a bit of that play out in the New South Wales Parliament in budget estimates, where you had the Greens, Sue Higginson, basically accusing the Minns government of using these non-existent anti-Semitic attacks as a reason for them introducing what they claim is unnecessary and outlandish legislation that was designed to protect Jewish communities. So you've already got people jumping on the assumption that there is no anti-Semitism actually behind these attacks, and I think we're going to see more of it.
Stephen Rice is the Australian's New South Wales editor. You can follow that complex and detailed story live at theaustralian.com.au.